listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for letting me spend some time with you. I certainly do appreciate it. I am not supervised once again, so I know that's a dangerous thing. It's scary, trust me. Hera is still visiting grandchildren, so I'm sure she's having a good time like any good grandmother would. Anyway, if you like the things you hear, those share buttons, like buttons, all those good things, just make it easier for people to find us, just like you did. If you haven't been to GiveGod90.com lately, you want to check that out. Author Jerry Mitchell, all one word. That's where the books are sold. And I got a lot to get into today, so I'm just going to dive right in. So, I've been looking at how the arguments for evolution in millions of years is illogical. And let's be honest, it's silly, right? It's just plain silly for a long list of reasons. There's something I left out, though, and I did it on purpose. I wanted to kind of save it, not as a teaser, but I want to make a point, all right? Do you realize that the evolutionists keep changing their position? They keep lowering the bar, so to speak. I guess if you're increasing the millions of years to billions of years, you're raising the bar. But you know what I mean. It's inconsistent. You are attempting to argue from a point of inconsistency with no facts. Years ago they said, "Oh, the Earth looks old," and then we have all these rock layers, right? We have these fossils, and because they were buried and now they have slowly eroded away, we can see them. It must have taken a lot of time, so they must be old. And the next thing, we've came up with a way to use carbon or radioisotope dating. The problem is it begins with a flawed assumption that there are only parent isotopes that are made when a rock is formed. But no one knows that with any degree of certainty. It's an assumption. It's just a consensus that some of them agree on. Not all of them, but some of them. And then, there's the, you know what? Birds evolved from reptiles. That's right. Reptiles changed into birds. And because reptiles have scales, somehow they evolved into feathers, even though there's no similarity between the two. So birds must be the descendants of reptiles. Well, I was watching something, I think yesterday. One of the nature shows on television. And now there's evidence birds came first. Imagine that. Science, once again, is catching up to the Bible. Genesis 1:20. God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creatures that have life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven." The Bible tells us that the fish and the birds were before the land animals on day 5 of creation. The beasts of the earth and man was not made or created until day 6. You see, the evolutionists keep moving the bar, so to speak, right? And their excuse for this is, we keep uncovering new information. New discoveries are being made all the time. Well, maybe it's time somebody suggests to them they should actually read what's in the Bible, because the Bible hasn't changed. The Bible hasn't changed the account of creation since Moses wrote it down. That's because it was the Creator himself who gave Moses the words to write. And the Creator himself was there to witness creation. No evolutionists were there. There wasn't a single person. Our Creator in Job 38:4 Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have this understanding. Tell me. But you see, nobody was there except the Almighty. When he spoke and released his Spirit to go out and create, our choice is to put our faith in some ever-changing fairy tale of evolution, where any new theory or any new idea that can't be proven is going to change the way we think about the world. Or we can put our faith in our Creator and in His Word that does not change. Malachi 3:6. I've said this over and over and over. It's my favorite verse in the Bible. I, Jehovah, do not change, so that you, the sons of Jacob, are not destroyed. Because if the Almighty changes anything, we're doomed. If He changes gravity one little bit, we're doomed. It is completely illogical to trust anything that continually changes. You cannot trust anything that is continually changing. Ask any great investors, right? The stock markets around the world continually change. Do they trust them? No, they watch them very, very carefully to see what trends they're having. Can you trust the weather? Do you go out in the spring of the year? If you live in the mountainous areas of the world, in the spring and in the fall of the year, it can start out very warm or it can start out very cool. And those climates can change throughout the day. If you don't take a jacket with you, you're going to be sorry. If you don't take a raincoat with you, you might be sorry. It's always changing. You don't trust it. You keep an eye on it. You look for it. You look at it very, very carefully. But God's Word never changes. It never changes. It is the one thing we can depend on every time. Want to take it a little closer to home? How many people would keep going to the same doctor? If every time you went to the same doctor for the same ailment, and he gives you a different diagnosis every time. Most people, I hope, would get a second opinion. They'd keep an eye on it. They'd look. But the world seems to keep going to the same worn-out old doctor that can't make up his mind. And it's the doctor of evolution. It keeps changing. Have you ever wondered why? Think about this. Why is it that the world looks at any believers, where it doesn't matter if they believe, if they trust the Bible, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Christian, why does the world say, oh, we can't trust you? It's because the people who have the truth. Let me say this way. When the people who have the truth of our Creator, when they can't offer a sound biblical answer to someone who asks them even the simplest questions, but instead they defer either to tradition or they defer to their denominational doctrine as an answer, you're going to have inconsistencies every time. If you ask, 5 different pastors from 5 different denominations, or if you ask, well, this is a bad example because, they say if you have 2 rabbis in a room, you have 3 different opinions. But if you ask, you're going to get various opinions about the exact same thing. It's no different than a creation scientist and a secular scientist looking at the same exact fossil from 2 different directions. And they come up with 2 different answers. It's inconsistent. The secular world, and forgive my bluntness here, but the secular world looks at religious people as nuts because we can't agree about what's in the book we claim to represent. We don't know what it really reveals, and so we can't explain it. Now, in the past, that excuse would have been okay, right? Because not everyone had access to a Bible to study or to read. They were at the mercy of trying to remember the things they were taught. Problem is, they weren't always taught the truth because the people who were teaching them may not have remembered it properly, right? They were taught the truth as the person who was doing the teaching understood the truth to be. But in today's world, it's a little different. Practically everyone who really wants to study the Bible has access to one in some way or another, unless, of course, you live in a country where it's illegal to have one, or if you live in a place that is so poor, you can't get your hands on one. But let's look at the United States. Why in a country like the United States, where Bibles are readily available, are people still so inconsistent? Well, part of that reason is some people just don't care. Others are simply complacent or arrogant with the knowledge they think they have. I happen to think it's a little bigger problem than that. You see, I think a huge part of the problem lies in our entertainment industry. Now, a lot of people, and this is dangerous, a lot of people acquire their knowledge about faith, right, from fictional entertainment. Think about that. Instead of studying and reading what's really there, it's easier to sit back, with a bag of potato chips and watch some fictional television show. I know a lot of Christians who watch the Chosen television show and they think, oh, it's just good, wholesome entertainment. But is it? Is it really? You see, when we watch the images, when we hear the dialogue, we become influenced by that. And if what is being portrayed is fictitious and we can't verify it in the Bible, then we wind up believing something that may be twisted or wrong. Right? You know what I'm saying? You watch something and you're like, well, did that really happen like that? And instead of going and looking, you just kind of question, and it eventually becomes, you either forget it or it becomes part of what you think you should be believing. There's a show I was watching while Myra was away. It's called The House of David. Well, I tried to watch it. I tried. I couldn't finish it. I couldn't get through the first episode. It portrays David as this little small-framed, illegitimate child, and he's got a chip on his shoulder. He's arrogant towards his own family. Does that sound like someone after God's own heart? Of course it doesn't. Nothing in that show comes close to what we read in the Bible about David or the times he lived in. The costumes are wrong. The costumes in The Chosen are wrong too, but, we'll give it to them a little bit. In the House of David, no one's wearing tzitzit, the fringes that they should be wearing, as they're commanded to wear. In the House of David, David's mother was supposedly killed by a lion. Where's that in the Bible? Let me know if you can find it. I don't think it's in there anywhere. But the list goes on. And the people who are producing these shows put this little disclaimer in the front, where nobody reads. It's up there for about 5 seconds. It says, this is a fictional television show. And they say, oh, that's good enough. We've warned you. This is for entertainment purposes only. We've warned you. It's not wholesome entertainment if it's leading people down the wrong path. problem with this is the people who watch things like this, they won't go pick up a Bible. They won't, do their own research. They won't study. They won't talk to people about it. Instead, they just keep going. Maybe they listen to somebody else on television, maybe somebody on YouTube or even a podcast like mine. And they believe everything they hear, right? In an ever-changing world about God's word that does not change. Well, are we any better off than the evolutionists who keep changing their position? Not really. We're no better than they are. We're the same. You see, it becomes very easy for the secular world to say, oh, you Jews and Christians, you just believe in fairy tales because you can't keep your story straight. Well, just because mankind is having a very difficult time keeping his story straight, we have a consistent creator who gives us his story if we're willing to read it and understand it. We would rather believe in our own traditions and place our denominational doctrines above the Bible. And when we do that, the Bible does become nothing more than a fairy tale, even to us. We call them Bible stories, right? But they're not. They are history in action. They are the Creator's instructions being applied to the lives of real people living in real places, in real situations, and that turns them into Bible lessons. They're not Bible stories. They are important historical lessons. And unless we're willing to treat them as real life lessons, actually open our Bibles, read what's there, as Meyer likes to say, just read the words, these lessons are lost and they become meaningless to us, Christians and Jews alike. Have you ever wondered why Yeshua Jesus was able to say in Matthew 24:24, "For false messiahs and false prophets will appear, and they will perform great signs and wonders and deceive even the elect, if that were possible." Even the most faithful. You see that warning for everybody who believes in the Almighty is that even those who claim to be faithful are able to be deceived. How much easier is it for the faithful to be deceived if their faith isn't in the Bible, but it's placed instead in some fictitious Bible construct that's considered wholesome entertainment? I'm going to be a little sarcastic here, okay? You might be better off watching some horror show that you know is fictitious. You know it can't be real. So you're not tricked into thinking that David is some 90-pound weakling, or Yeshua was an only child, or that he was married, whatever the writers put in the script. Now, I'm not saying that all fictional entertainment is bad. What I am saying is you've got to have the ability to distinguish between what's true and what's false. And one of the best ways to be able to do that is to become familiar with the Bible. Maybe not on a scholarly level. You don't have to be some PhD. In fact, that's kind of dangerous. But you have to be familiar enough so that you know when you're watching, when you're listening, when you're reading, and you hear something that is someone's idea, it's just part of entertainment. It's part of the book, part of the movie, part of the TV show. That's all it is. And you've got to be able to distinguish between the two. I had a visitor stop by the house the other day to evangelize me, right? Now, evangelize in air quotes, right? While most people won't even answer the door for these folks, and you know who I'm talking about, right? Me, on the other hand, I like to use this as a teachable moment sometimes, and maybe turn the tables around a little bit. But Meyer being away, I don't have a lot of extra time to waste. So this very nice fellow who was obviously much older than I am, when he began his little spiel, I guess, I stopped him. I politely said something like, I don't want to waste your time, but I need to let you know who I am. And I explained to him that I've written 3 books that compare the traditions and doctrines of man with what's really in the Bible. I have this podcast. It reaches over 1,000 people every month. And what I try to do is simply do nothing more than to convince all of my listeners and all of my readers to improve their lives doing nothing more than living the way our Creator designed us to live. Right? That's what I try to do. You want to improve your life? You want your life to get better? You have to change. You have to live the way you are designed by your Creator to live. Everything was good. Everything was happy. Gentleman left. He was all good. Well, the next morning, somebody different stopped by, and I went through the same thing, right? But he wanted to prove his point. I'm like, okay. So I kept, said what I told the other fellow, who I am, what I've done. And I said, I've also spoken in various churches on the subject, been very well received, been interviewed by nationally known broadcasters. The look on the person's face was kind of classic. He realized he wasn't talking to just his average person, but he wasn't deterred. He wasn't deterred. He kept trying. He kept trying. I give it to him that way. But it didn't take long for him to realize I knew a little more about the Bible and his particular denomination than he did. And then it was my turn to ask questions. I said, by the way, do you know where the real Mount Sinai was? He didn't. So do you realize that the Turkish government has spent millions of dollars to build a road and a visitor center at the Noah's Ark site? And did you realize that there are more Muslims who visit that site than Christians? He didn't know that. I asked him if he thought that the heavens and the earth were created in 6 24-hour days. And I got the deer in the headlight look. I got the deer in the headlight look. I said, do you believe it was 6 days? And he says, well, I'm not sure. And I said, how? And this was an honest question. I'm not being sarcastic here by any stretch of the imagination. I said, how are you hoping to convince me to believe in the Bible if you don't? How are you able, why would you even try to convince me to believe in something you don't believe? And, I began laying out some of the things that I've laid out in the last couple parts of this series. He left with a very different perspective than he did when he arrived. A lot of denominations will use Matthew 28:19 as their great commission to go out and knock on doors of strangers' houses to tell them about Jesus. And that's not the context of that verse that we read. It doesn't matter whether you read it in Greek, doesn't matter whether you read it in one of the Hebrew manuscripts that we have of that. We are to live as an example so that others who see us ask. And when they ask, we need to be ready to answer. not from tradition, not from doctrine, but with accurate biblical information. If you can't do that, don't offer biblical sounding answers. Okay? Just don't. Don't try to convince somebody to believe something you don't. I'm not boasting here because I don't have all the answers. I'm still learning. I'm studying, and I rely on the Almighty Himself to provide those answers. Now, I can say something I've come to realize, even without the formal indoctrination through some accredited school. I have learned more about the Bible from the Bible than any of the pastors I've met who spent years sometimes in schools. Now, I can't say that about all the rabbis I've met. There's been a couple that they've been able to learn a little bit from me. I hope you folks have been able to learn a little bit. I hope you've learned, well, that you're going to have a much better life if you live the way you're designed to live. I hope you've learned that you can trust the Creator. You can trust His Word. I hope you've learned it's illogical and useless to argue against the Bible because, it's just illogical to argue against the truth, right? Because His Word is trusted and can be trusted as truth. His Word is not going to change like the ever-evolving theory of evolution. Yeah, we might misspeak. We might purposely do what Eve did and add to His Word, get ourselves in more trouble, just like she did. But you can trust what He says. You can trust what He does. Now, I encourage whoever hears this, think about how you think about the Bible. Not what you believe, but how you think about it. Do you really believe it, or do you just want it to be true? Because there's a difference. There's a difference. Do you trust that the Bible really tells us that it's true? What it says is accurate historically, spiritually. You think of it. It is His truth. It's His story to tell. Or do you allow a little bit of wiggle room? Inconsistency, like millions of years instead of 6 days. I'm going to leave you today with a little bit of advice for what it's worth. After all, you get this free. Don't try to argue with someone who believes evolution. It's impossible and therefore illogical to argue with anyone who continually changes their opinion in the middle of a discussion. If you're talking about fossils and the next thing they're talking about is dating, and the next thing they're going off on some tangent about birds and dinosaurs or whatever, if they're refusing to stick to the point, it's ridiculous. Their religion of evolution will never be consistent. Their excuses will always change. It would be easier to argue with an ice cube. Seriously. An ice cube can only change from ice to water vapor, but an evolutionist can change from millions of years to billions of years, to reptiles, to birds, to carbon dating, to radioisotope dating, to you name it. It's all over the board. If they even have a board, I'm not even sure you could fit all of their pieces on a board. It'd be kind of like herding cats or herding mosquitoes. It'd be wasted time. But your time will be much, much better spent reading and studying Scripture. So until next time, I wish you many, many blessings, everyone.